What's going on, y'all? KM Best here, your favorite 69th ranked Marvel snapper with a piece of content that I'm really excited about. We're going to be ranking every single card in Series 4 and 5 in terms of whether you should purchase them and what order you should do it in. And we're going to be talking about every single one of them. So if you have a card that you want to talk about, you can find it, you can hear my opinion on it, and figure out if you agree or disagree as to why this card is ranked where it is. This is going to take the form of a tier list. I know this is a long video, so enjoy. All right, y'all, let's get this tier list started. First up on the tier list is Alioth, and Alioth is a solid card. Like, my instinct is that it's still quite good. I think it's a little bit underrated right now because we're in the immediate aftermath of the Blob nerf. And with Blob in the game as big as he is, Alioth ended up taking a bit of a back seat in decks that would have otherwise played him. And I think that means that Alioth is a solid card, but not necessarily one that you're going to be like, oh my god, it's Alioth about. I don't know if he goes in A tier or B tier here. I think I want him in A tier, but I'm gonna be generous with that, and I will go back to him. Right now, Alioth is solid in these like Annihilus control decks. He's a solid junk deck finisher. He's a solid lockdown deck finisher. Maybe he ends up coming back into Thanos in some capacity. Those are the main capacities in which you use Alioth. Right now, I think he's okay. The more I talk about it, the more I think I want him in B tier. But since he's like the kind of okay I play against often, I think he ends up being more okay than okay, and that's what keeps him in the A tier. Next up is Annihilus, who I think is a slam dunk A tier candidate. And the reasons I'm interested in Annihilus are mostly related to the fact that he tends to be flexible, and the package with him and Sentry is still quite strong. I don't necessarily think he's always going to be this good, but you can play him in Annihilus bounce decks. You can play him in Annihilus lockdown decks with Alioth even. I've seen people playing him in Thanos. This is a very powerful card even after the nerf that made it a 5/6 and restricted it a little bit more. Annihilus is quite strong. I would say it is a solid A tier card. Yes, it is coincidental that we have put two cards that have the letter A at the beginning of their names in A tier. I promise I'm not doing a bit. Next up is Black Knight, who also goes in A tier, I think. This is a good card, but I'm less than impressed with the deck right now. It's the kind of deck that is good when it works and not good when it isn't. There's a fundamental inconsistency to it that requires you to be a very good snapper. I think a lot of people, myself included, expected that a Thanos nerf would lead to Black Knight being much stronger, but right now, I just haven't really seen that borne out. That said, I do think it's probably at the top of tier A because it is a deck unto itself. It's an archetype unto itself. Black Knight is very good, and you cannot play any deck with Black Knight in it if you don't have the card Black Knight. There's no real replacements for it. It gets the job done. It goes in the top of tier A. You could convince me it goes higher because I still believe in the deck, even though I think it's a little bit iffy. It's a deck that I have a lot of faith in. It could get better. Next up is Blob, who just got nerfed to 6-0, but I actually still think he's S tier. I might get, like, killed for this, but I'm pretty sure Blob is still just the biggest available 6-drop most of the time. He still goes in Thanos. He's still that good. I am fairly convinced that he's in a relatively balanced state, but even in that relatively balanced state, he remains extremely powerful. Now, you could also convince me that he goes, top of A tier, bottom of S tier, something along those lines. But right now, in the immediate aftermath of the nerf, I think he is still quite solid, and anyone saying that they killed him is overreacting drastically, in my opinion. Next up is Caiera, a very solid A or B tier card. I'm going to put her top of B here, but I think she might get moved up later on. I suspect that people don't really understand how good Caiera is in specifically like Thanos Lockjaw type decks. Because the typical weakness of your Lockjaw is you invest really heavily into the Lockjaw lane and you have a bunch of early big guys out, and then those big guys get Shang-Chi'd and you die, and Caiera turns that off entirely. Totally invalidates Shang-Chi as a counter to anything you're doing. I strongly believe she is a very powerful card. The only reason that I don't have her higher here is that she is more of a complementary piece than a build-around piece. If you don't have her, I think you can still play most decks that she goes in, but she makes those decks significantly better. Next up is Daken. Are we going to have to create a new tier? I think Daken can just go in C tier, and we'll use C tier as just like cards that are like, you know, someone might play this, but I probably wouldn't. And Daken is definitely a someone might play this, but I probably wouldn't kind of card. I think he is overshadowed in much the same way that fellow 3/4 scaler Sebastian Shaw is, but I think it's more that the 3-cost spot is just hard to balance for, I think. And I think Daken is a victim of that. It's hard to create a good 3/4. Caiera is the best they've done, and I think it's almost impossible to create like a good 3-drop carry without that card being busted like Werewolf by Night was. So Daken, you play him in Destroy rarely, you play him in Discard pretty often, and that's kind of it. Darkhawk is going to go in B tier, purely because Blob really does make him worse. There is a world where we start seeing more Darkhawks, and in that world, I still worry about like getting blobbed. Even though he's not eating every card now, just eating a couple cards is quite bad. And I think that that is enough to keep Darkhawk down in the B tier. Another card that keeps Darkhawk in the B tier is Loki. I think Loki into Darkhawk decks is just sort of a very difficult and frustrating matchup to encounter as the Darkhawk deck. I don't really like playing Darkhawk decks right now, but it's okay, and that's kind of, he's like okay plus, and that's what I'm using the B tier for here. Darkhawk is a solid card, but not one that I think is worth over-investing in right now. Next up is Echo, and Echo is going in the C tier above Daken. The way I like to think of Echo is filling the same role as Caiera, where it's like, when this card is good, there are no real replacements. However, or not even like there are no real replacements, it's like there are replacements, but it's the best at doing what it does. That said, sometimes there are certain situations that nothing else will do what it does. You can replace it in the aggregate, but not in the specific. Like with Caiera, you can replace it in Thanos Lockjaw with a Killmonger package, right? With Echo, you can often replace it with other ongoing tech. But there are specific situations in which that tech is not doing what Echo would do, similar to how there are specific situations in which not having Caiera will disadvantage you in a Thanos deck. And I think that Echo is significantly worse than Caiera, which is why she's a tier below. So that's where we're going with that. Next up is Elsa Bloodstone, who goes in D tier. They killed her, and I hate them for it. This is a dead card. Awful. Don't even bother with her anymore. It makes me legitimately upset to consider her. I actually forgot how badly they nerfed her until I tried to, like, theory craft something with her, and I realized I was thinking, oh, this card's not very good. And I hadn't even fully processed how much they nerfed her. I was like, oh, she's not good even if she affected every lane. She doesn't affect every lane. She's hardcore unplayable. I'm very sad about it. Next up is Galactus, who is going in the B tier. I think the Selene Galactus stuff is actually pretty compelling, but it is still very predictable, and I don't think it carries the same, oh, you didn't prepare for this, you died inevitability that previous iterations of Galactus did. That said, I am more excited for Galactus right now than I ever have been in the past, since Alioth came out and he had to get nerfed to a 6/5, I would say. This is the most excited I've been for Galactus since then, and I am reflecting that by putting him in the B tier. Next up is Ghost Spider, who I want to say goes top of C tier, but move stuff is like genuinely pretty interesting to me right now. So it's possible she gets moved up. Ghost Spider, like Echo, is the kind of card that you will need if you want to play certain types of decks. Although I think Ghost Spider is much more required for the deck she goes in. Does that make sense? Like Ghost Spider, you can't play a move deck without her. This is the card that you want to play with Dagger. It is amazing, 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 amazing. The issue is that deck is a little bit fragile and a little bit face up. And so that means there's significant vulnerabilities to Shang-Chi. There's significant vulnerabilities to Shadow King. And you end up in these awkward situations where like sometimes there's vulnerabilities to Killmonger. I worry that the deck does points well, but doesn't adapt well. And I think if the deck ends up being good, I mean, Ghost Spider could end up even as high as here because she is legitimately that important to it. Like you can't not play her in these decks. That said, I'm reserving my judgment and I'm keeping Ghost Spider in the C tier for now. Next up is Gladiator, who is actually just an easy A tier. This is a 3/8 and they got rid of all the scaling threats in the game, so 95% of the time, this guy's just bigger than any bishop you would ever play. And so you play Gladiator even though his downside kills you sometimes. I get it. I've lost to my own Gladiator more times than I can count. It happens a lot. But he's still a 3/8. He's still great. He goes in the A tier. That's just how it is. Next up is Havok, who is going to go in the D tier. This card sucks, and that's really all there is to say about it. It's a bad card, and it can sometimes get carried by slightly better shells, but I've never seen it run in a good deck, and I think it is quite poor. Next up is Hercules, just got buffed to a 4/7. I have him significantly below Ghost Spider. Although they're in the same tier, it almost makes me want to split up those tiers because Hercules is so much less important to the move deck than Ghost Spider is. Ghost Spider is amazing in move. Hercules is okay. And I think that's sort of convincing me that, like, you know, maybe we gotta move the Ghost Spider up. But, like, until I see move really make some waves, I'm gonna keep Ghost Spider in C. Just understand that there's a significant gradation here. Ghost Spider before Hercules if you're a move fanatic. Next up is High Evolutionary, who is gonna go probably... this one's hard. I think bottom of A, top of B is the right place for High Evo. She-Not is a fine deck, but not a great one. That said, Evo gets a lot of benefit from just being a card that is unbelievably good for a budget low rank player. You pick up High Evolutionary and you basically have She-Not already built once you hit Series 3 because you were probably going to open She-Hulk on your free Series 3 card. That is a very strong way to start the game out. He is a deck unto himself and he's not an expensive one. And so he's a little overrepresented, but I do think that She-Not is a strong deck, and that is what's carrying him to this A-tier thing here. He's very good. She-Not is good enough. If this was a bad deck at high elo, and I think it's like an okay one, but if it was actively bad, he'd be top of B. But since it's like an okay deck, yeah, he'll go bottom of A. I think he's going to be a card you're going to want to purchase before a lot of the other cards here. Like, he's like, if you're just starting out, getting him is a free roll. You basically just get a deck immediately. So for that reason, I think you could throw him up here if what we're looking at here is like purchase order, which I think we are. High Evo is a high priority purchase. I do think that you could, if we're talking purely purchase order, you could put him in S tier, honestly. Like, this is one of the best purchases in the game. And I think that is what this tier list is about. So I'm going to put him up there, even though I think that overall, it's not the best thing you could do, but it gets you in the building. Does that make sense? Getting High Evo gets you in the building in a way that getting few other cards in the game does. And getting in the building is really important when you're building your collection. Next up is Hitmonkey. I actually think Hitmonkey is quite good right now. Hitmonkey could go up, but I think that, like, people have forgotten how good Hitmonkey can be because it has been better in these previous metagames to use scaling threats that scale on the board rather than Hitmonkey, which scales at the end of the game. But I think Hitmonkey is a genuinely strong card and deserves to be in B tier. You play it in bounce type stuff. You play it in Sarah type stuff some of the time. He's a lower priority target because there are usually replacements for what he's trying to do. For example, in current Sarah decks, you just don't even play points on the final turn of the game. You only play tech, and your points are from, like, you know, Miss Marvel and Gladiator and things like that. You're not a Hitmonkey deck. You aren't playing Mysterio or whatever. But you could be, and I think it's not that much worse if you are. And I think that is why I have Hitmonkey so high relative to what other people might have him at. Next up is Howard the Duck, straight into D tier. Worst card in the game. Don't buy him. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. Next up is Iron Lad, who I suspect ends up in the A tier just off of versatility right now. I think if we're talking about purchase order rather than power, he ends up pretty high. Like, you do something like this for purchase order if that's how you're doing your priority, I think, and Alioth ends up at the bottom probably. Like, if we're looking purely in terms of will this bust your make your account better, Iron Lad is one of the best things you can pick up. However, he is no longer like the slam dunk amazing godly tier card that he used to be. He goes in a lot of stuff, but it's kind of inconsistent when Iron Lad decks are actually the best option for you. I think rarely is an Iron Lad deck, at least recently, the best deck in the game. And that means that he is top of A tier rather than anywhere else. And since his decks require more cards from you than high Evo decks do, he's a worse purchase than high Evo. Does that make sense? Next up is Jean Grey. I just don't know what to do with her. Like, I keep thinking maybe one day there'll be a Jean Grey deck that I like, that I'm interested in playing, that actually uses her right. And I honestly don't think that'll ever happen until they remove the fact that she affects you too. I just don't think it'll happen until that happens. I am only putting her out of D tier in deference to the fact that she's at least interesting and you can envision potential scenarios where she makes sense. And I think there are more worlds where she makes sense than worlds that she doesn't. But to me, this is Goose, but series 4 and 5, right? And what I mean by that is it's a card that looks cool and is cool, but ultimately is very replaceable in almost everything you're playing it in, because it's only ever good in such a specific situation that unless you are in that specific situation all the time, you usually can do better than this card. And that is how I think of Jean Grey. Next up is Jeff. That is an easy S tier pickup. Phenomenal, amazing, love Jeff. People do think that he's better than he is, which is to say, he used to be in like half the decks, and now he's only in like 30% of the decks. But a card that's in 30% of the decks is still a great pickup. He's just not, you know, oh my god, it's Jeff, he's worth 10k tokens. That's probably not true anymore. He's just one of the best things you can get out of any of these, you know, tokens, shop, or series, or spotlight caches. He's just one of the best, right? I do think at this point it is very fair to drop Blob below the other two, by the way. Kang the Conqueror is really bad and goes in the D tier, and I have nothing else to say about him because he sucks. Kitty Pryde has been nerfed so many damn times that she's actually kind of dead right now, and that makes me that is actually devastating. I'm putting her in C tier instead of D tier because I guess I'm coping. Like it would kill me inside to put her in the same tier as Kang the Conqueror. But she's definitely at the bottom of C tier. Let me put it that way. Knull ends up in B tier, I think, but you could talk me into top of C tier. I have it in B tier because right now the destroy decks are a little more figured out than the move decks, but I think it is quite like, it's a required card in Destroy. I don't think Destroy is a great archetype, but it's fine. It's another one of those cards that, like High Evo, it gets you in the building with a Series 3 collection, right? So you can have mostly Series 3 cards, pick up Knull and like Nico or something, and suddenly you have Destroy. And I think that that's the kind of thing that is valuable. It's good that that card exists and can do that. But I do think Destroy is significantly worse than She-Not. I do think it takes more to make Destroy than it does to make She-Not. And so that's why High Evo is in S and Knull is only in B. Next up is Lady Deathstrike, who is going in the D tier, baby. I have played this card probably more than most people at my rank. And I like her, and I can already hear people saying, like, no, there are situations where she makes sense. And that's true. There are definitely situations where she makes sense. But her best meta already happened. And it was the meta where 2-3 Mobius, 2-3 Luke Cage, Collector, Angela, those were the right targets that you could hit with her. We're not in that meta anymore. She's not doing that kind of stuff. I did play her in Destroy at that time. It was very good. But if the meta is not entirely composed of stuff that she's good against, she's just not a playable card. And so right now she goes in the D tier. Next up is Legion, who is going in the A tier, but I think a little bit lower than people might think. Legion is a very replaceable card now that Snowguard exists, but he is a little more useful. I think the issue with Legion is he costs 5, and it's really hard to fit a 5-cost guy in a lot of decks. It's a difficult thing to do. Another issue with Legion is he scales with play skill, and that means that he ends up getting better the better you are. And I think that that is a tough recommend for a lot of people who are just starting out in the game. I think that there are going to be better things for you to pick up as you learn the game, and then you end up with the Legion. That said, I mean, I play him in a lot of decks. I am a big fan of the card. I just think he goes in and out of the meta depending on how easily you are able to justify playing a 5/7. Right now, it's like okay-ish, but I do think that he's a little more meta-dependent, that ebb and flow, than people tend to think that he is. Loki goes in S tier. Honestly, Loki goes at the top of S tier. Loki is still the best card in the game, in my opinion. But again, I think that might only be true for people at very high elo. But as far as I can tell, this dude is the man still. To quote Drake, how am I the man still? How am I the man still? And Loki is the man still. I think that this is a card that benefits a decent amount from the way in which Blob was reworked, which is to say, it is now a card that, like, the Loki Blob is, like, almost as big as the Thanos Blob, unless the Thanos Blob high rolls, which helps that matchup. Loki's also pretty okay into Thanos, like, not as good as it used to be, but, like, I would say favored, and being favored into Thanos is a good thing, and all this other stuff that, like, people are trying, Loki tends to be good into that, too. So, yeah, I think Loki's still the best card in the game. I am fairly confident, for me at least. The one caveat I'll give you is that Loki traditionally has been much worse the further down in skill level you get. This is a card that is at its best when you know everything about what your opponent is trying to do. And that is something that not everyone does. And so the worse you are at the game, the more casual you are, the worse he is for you, because there's such a wealth of knowledge required to understand the contextual intricacies of the deck. Rick and Morty copy pasta goes here. To be fair, you have to have a very high IQ to understand Loki. No, like, this is a card that you need to know what your opponent is doing to determine if you even want to play it. And I think that it's actually probably a good thing, because I think this iteration of Loki is pretty fair and very skill testing. And so it's probably a good thing that I'm looking at you and I'm saying, I don't know if I can recommend this to everybody, you know? Like, I just don't know. Next up is Man-Thing, who is going in the C tier, but at the very top of C tier, I think. Maybe just below Ghost Spider. Man-Thing's actually pretty good. It's just there's so many good things at the 4-cost slot that it's hard to justify playing him. The nerf to Luke Cage was a big nerf to Man-Thing as well. I actually think this card is a little underplayed right now, but because of that nerf to Luke Cage, there's just very little incentive to investigate him because he doesn't feel like a card that's easy to break. He's not a card that is like, oh, I know exactly what I'm doing at this. He's like a marginal advantage card, and there are so many 4-drops that are better than marginal advantage at this point in the game, and so he just doesn't see a lot of play because there are better options. Next up is Martyr. You know, she's still going in the D tier. I get it. They made her better. Like, she's still going in the D tier though. Like, let's be real. This is not a card that is worth picking up ever. Don't do it. Next up is Miek, who is also, I think, going in the D tier. Maybe the bottom of C, if that's where we put Kitty. Miek is only playable in one archetype, and that archetype isn't very good, and I wouldn't recommend you buy him, and that's pretty much it for Miek. Like, it's okay. I've seen more people playing... I will say this. I have seen more people playing Miek in the top 100 than I have seen most of the rest of the C tier. However, that's probably because he just came out and not an actual indicator of his power, right? It's probably just, oh, he just came out. Let's play the card that just came out, right? And I don't think that's the right way to go about, like, basing purchases. But, like, I will say, you know, I've seen some Mieks. I know Desmond was playing traditional discard. One thing I will say, traditional discard benefited a big amount from the Blob nerf, because now Silver Samurai absolutely murders Blob. 100% of the time, Silver Samurai hits Blob. It is possible Miek ends up better, because if that deck does end up good, because Silver Samurai murders Blob now, Miek is definitely a part of it. So I will, like, give myself the out here of it is entirely possible Miek ends up being good. Next up is Mirage, who is going to go in the B tier for me. Mirage is an excellent card that has the issue of having other cards that do its own job, not better, but okay enough. If you're playing Loki, yeah, you can replace it with Sentinel. Literally the first card you get in the game. You're good. Like, you don't need to buy Mirage. That said, it's a bit like Caiera, where it's like, yeah, you can replace it, but most of the time it's going to be the best option. I like Mirage a lot more than most people do, I think. So I'll give you that warning. But she is a great card for information, for extra power, for a card for Loki. Mirage is just very good. I will give you the other caveat, though, of if Loki goes, you're probably not playing Mirage a lot of places. I think Loki is her shell, and so if Loki goes at some point, well, she goes straight down the tier list. Mobius M. Mobius is an A or B tier card, honestly. This is actually a really tough one. So the thing with Mobius is, I think he's better than most people do. It sucks to play a 3/3, and that's undeniable. But there's so much cheat in the game right now that I think Mobius is just one of the best cards you can pick up, probably. Like, this is a energy cheat condom. You don't want to get energy cheated on? Well, Mobius will help you with that. Like, this is a card that solves problems that no other card in the entire game can solve. You're losing to Mr. Negative? Mobius. You're losing to Sarah and Zabu? Mobius. You're losing to Loki? Mobius. Hope they don't rogue it. This is a really good card. You probably should pick him up when you have the option. There are very few cards that are legitimately better than him in the entire game. You can see the ones that I think are probably better than him here, but I can make an argument for picking Mobius over most of the cards that are ahead of him, assuming you're just trying to answer some very specific issues in the metagame. Next up is Modok. Modok is in the same spot as Knull. I think that Discard and Destroy are not very far off each other right now. And like Knull, Modok is required in order to play that deck. And like Knull, he is a card that gets you in the building, where you have your series 1 and 2 discard deck, you pick up Dracula, you pick up Modok, and you have a good deck, right? Like a playable-ish deck, right? These are the same dynamics as High Evo, where the High Evo deck is probably better, but like these cards act in a similar way in terms of how they work with the cards in your collection as you're easing into the game. And I think that Modok specifically is a solid one. You could convince me to put Modok over Knull, but I think right now Knull is one that I see more of. Let me put it that way. Next card is Miss Marvel. She goes in S tier. She might be the best card in the game. That is our girl. Miss Marvel is so damn good. Even though she got nerfed, they did not nerf the soul of the card. I think, especially like with these most recent nerfs, Blob and Miss Marvel, anyone who's complaining that they like killed them or that it's a bait and switch, like, no, these are the same cards as they already were. You can see I have them in S tier right now. These are still some of the best cards in the game. Loki, Miss Marvel, Blob. They're still amazing. They're still great cards. No one got bait and switched. You want to talk about bait and switch? Talk about Elsa Bloodstone, dude. But these three, I don't think you can. I don't think you can talk about it. These are amazing, amazing, amazing cards. They are so damn good. Next up is Nebula, who's going to go in the B tier. Nebula is a card that is used, I won't say sparingly, but is used in like sort of niche decks, but she's a very good card in those decks, right? Like you have She-Not with Caiera. She's a great card there. You have your lockdown decks that want to play Nebula. This is a card you'll see a decent amount. It's rarely in the best deck in the game because its decks tend to be a little bit clunky, a little bit predictable, but Nebula is a key piece of a lot of decks, although I do think she's a little more replaceable than many of the cards ahead of her in either B or A tier. Next up is Nico Minoru, who I can't decide where to put. I think that Nico Minoru is benefiting from a bit of a Legion effect, where she came out in a meta that was very good for her, but because of that, ended up in a situation where people overrate how good she is, I think. I'm putting her in B tier because she is obviously always going to be played in Destroy. She is often going to be played in Thanos, although people have gone away from that as they've gone into Lockjaw decks. I think that is a case for her not being a part of the Thanos deck is when they are playing Lockjaw decks. I think that she is a unique and powerful card in bounce decks, but bounce decks have been nerfed as well. She is a card that doesn't have a home exactly, but goes in multiple decks pretty okay. And I see a lot of people in the chat right now, they're talking about like she goes in S tier, she goes in S tier, she goes in S tier. And I don't think that's true. I have looked at the data for this card on Untapped, and she has like a negative win rate. Like, this is a card that feels better than it is, I think. And I think that it is being carried by coming out in the perfect meta for it. It came out in a meta where Thanos wasn't playing Lockjaw, and so Thanos was playing her, where Destroy was actually playable, and where the best decks were all bounce decks that were loving playing her. And we are not in that meta anymore. And I think we have to acknowledge that like something like this is her floor. She's in a floor scenario right now. Now, whether or not that'll change, I leave that to you to figure out. But she is currently in a floor scenario. She came out in a ceiling scenario. And I mean, I think it's probably good that her floor is like B tier, right? Like that's probably a good thing for her. But it's definitely not the card it was when it came out. Next up is Nimrod, who is gonna go in C tier, I think. I want to put Nimrod in C tier. Nimrod has problems right now, and those problems are mostly related to the way in which Nimrod works tends to get a little bit invalidated by like when there's just decks that go super tall in the metagame. Like, nice Nimrod combos. Sorry, my Lockjaw lane is 50 power. You know what I mean? Like, it's a deck that's not amazingly well positioned, but once those outliers get brought into line, I mean, Shuri Nimrod is like one of the scariest things you can see. Like, that is really terrifying to see Shuri Nimrod, and then they just like, vomit 12s everywhere on the final turn of the game. It's dangerous. This is a dangerous ass card. And I think it is a good card, but not one that's part of a bunch of top tier strategies. If it ever became part of a top tier strategy, it would be a Living Tribunal type deck where it's like very easy to beat. But for the moments that it is not being teched against, I mean, I can't really argue against it. You know what I mean? Next up is Ravonna Renslayer, who's going to go at the bottom of B tier, I believe. But you could honestly talk me into her going into a little bit of a lower tier. The reason she's here is mostly her use case with Living Tribunal. Actually, let's put her in C tier. But we're going to put her at the top of C tier. This is a card that you get when you are able to make like luxury purchases, right? Like you can pick up luxury purchases like off meta decks that you want to use to attack the metagame. Ravonna can do that. She has some mildly unexplored synergy with Blob, but mostly what she does is she goes in Mr. Negative and she goes in Living Tribunal. Living Tribunal is the better of those two decks, and I do think she's required for it, but her lack of overlap with any other archetype makes her a less than desirable purchase. However, if you are going to spend tokens on something, a Series 4 card is a good thing to do it, and she is a unique Series 4 card that I actually think is pretty good. And I do think that if you have the other cards for those decks, I don't see an issue with picking her up. Sebastian Shaw is not good. He's going in the D tier. And I honestly wonder if maybe I'm being not harsh enough on him. I think my issue with Sebastian Shaw is that's like, okay, I'll play him in Silver Surfer, and he's not even good there. And so it's like, sure, I guess. He goes in exactly one deck, and I'm not convinced he's good in that deck. But if you want me to remove him up a tier, I think I'm fine with that. I will move him up a tier, and I will bump Jean Grey down. Let's be real. I've accepted my copium. But yeah, his problem is his deck isn't good, and he might not be good in it. He's a big guy, but that's not really the problem that Silver Surfer suffers from. It's not like a lack of stats that kills the deck. It's like not being able to interact in the right way. And so he's solving a problem that isn't there. Next up is Selene. She actually just got buffed. So in the video, it'll show her as like a 1/1. She is better than that. I will give her that. She is a better card than that. As a 1/2, I think she's still in the C tier, but I will asterisk this one because as a 1/2, I'm interested in the Galactus stuff with her. I don't think we fully explored that, and I'm willing to look at you and say, I'm not sure it's going to be good, but it is worth investigating, and if it is good, I think she's quite good. I actually think her new stat line is very competitive, and I am interested to see where she goes from here. Shaw is better than Selene? No, he's not. Shaw isn't even good in his own deck. Next up is Silk, who is going to go in the B tier. I am not a Silk fanboy right now. I don't think many of her decks have been very good, but she goes in like some solid tier 2 type stuff where I am not opposed to putting her in the B tier alongside something like Nebula, where it's like, this is rarely being run in the best deck in the game, but it's like pretty good if you can pick it up for free. So you have like these sort of Silk lockdown decks. There's like bad Silky Smooth decks. They're not great, but it's okay enough that I think she stands clearly above the like mishmash of weird shit that is the C tier. So I think that's how she ends up in B here. Next is Silver Samurai, and this is going to surprise some people, but I'm going to put Silver Samurai in the B tier here. And the stated reason is that Silver Samurai absolutely dunks on Blob, and that is a thing that people should be exploring more. I'm not saying it's going to end up in the B tier, but I think that Silver Samurai right now, dunking on Blob, a card that I think is still very good, could have a legitimate role. And I think that this is a solid card that I'm much more interested in now than I was previously. I am interested in this card. I am compelled by this card. I'm not saying you need to buy it now, but if you have it, this might be the time to start exploring it. It is also a card that is keeping Hela single-handedly viable. This is like how Hela beats like other combo decks, right? It blows up like the Iron Man out of a Living Tribunal deck, which otherwise Hela cannot beat ever. So if you are a Hela gamer, this is an absolute irreplaceable card. Next up is Snowguard, who's going to go A tier for me. This is an A tier card in my opinion, and I think that is fair, although a lot of her utility is being buoyed by being one of the best cards with Loki. She's just a good card. She is definitely, like Mirage, a card that is best with Loki and really is in here because of Loki, but you can't just ignore the context of she's amazing with Loki and try to rate her outside of that because she's so good with Loki. The reason she's above Mirage is there are no replacements for her that are nearly as good as her, where with Mirage, Sentinel is almost as good as her. So we have Snowguard significantly above Mirage because Loki is so damn good, in my opinion. We end up playing her. Next up is Spider-Ham, who I'm going to surprise some people again. I'm putting in the B tier. Spider-Ham is going in the B tier for me. I think that Spider-Ham is more useful than people think. I think he's more targeted than people think. And I run him in a decent amount of bounce shells because of just how good that disruption is. Even though you're not getting much out of bouncing him. You only get it once, but he's still worth running. And I think that's a testament to just how strong he is. I think Spider-Ham is really good. I'm actually kind of sad that they didn't, revert him back to his old form. I think his old form was good for the metagame, but I can understand how they might be annoyed at how it actually works. I think Spider-Ham's a great card and is definitely worth picking up if you're looking to play bounce stuff, but is not necessarily required. He just makes some matchups easier than they otherwise would be. Next up is Thanos, who is going in the top of S tier. Thanos is probably the single card that you can pick up that will do the most for you right now. He has been broken multiple times. He has been the best deck in the game multiple times. He is amazing. He is a god. This is a deck unto himself. He is phenomenal. You can do so much with just Thanos and Series 3 cards. And obviously, yes, Blob is an important piece of it, but Thanos has this pedigree of being absolutely amazing. He deserves this spot. This is the best card you can possibly pick up with tokens. Period. Next up is Living Tribunal, who, I'm going to be real with you, I'm putting in the A tier. I'm putting Living Tribunal in the A tier. That's where he's going. Living Tribunal goes in the A tier. I think that this deck is actually good. We just left a metagame where everyone was playing like Enchantress and Rogue and Mobius and all that stuff. And yes, it absolutely folds to that. But asking a question, do you have the answer, is strong. That is a strong, strong, strong tactic to take. It's good. It's a good card, or a good deck, I should say. And I do think that, don't pick him up. Here's the issue with me putting him here, though, right? I put Ravonna in C. And that means, that's an issue, right? If I put Living Tribunal in A and I put Ravonna in C, don't play Living Tribunal without Ravonna, right? So I think I have to move Tribunal down to B. I think he's an A tier deck, but if we're talking about purchases, he requires so much out of you, right? He requires you to purchase all his support cards, because basically every other version of Living Tribunal that isn't doing Ravonna, Zabu, Sarah, Onslaught, Iron Man, Mystique, that isn't playing the exact list, is bad. And it's just this that's good. And so I guess he has to end up in B tier because of how many other things he requires for his deck to be good. Next up is Phoenix Force. Phoenix Force is a good card. I am going to put it in mid B tier alongside Knull, Modok kind of cards, where if you just can pick it up and play the deck, it's a threatening deck. It's kind of a deck that is, I won't say telegraphed, but it's a strong deck that has a lot of scaling with how good you are at snapping and how good your opponents are at retreating. And I think that is a fine thing to be. I think Phoenix Force feels a lot stronger than it is in terms of cube profile because your opponents are just leaving, right? It's very hard to win 8 cubes with this deck. And because of that, it ends up in sort of an awkward spot among the other combo decks because the other combo decks are like more easily able to trick people into staying, right? Whereas you're not tricking anybody into staying with Phoenix Force. It just doesn't happen, but they can trick you into staying and get your ass. And I think that Phoenix Force is okay, mid B, but it is strong right now. And I do think that it is stronger right now than it has been in a long time, in my opinion. Next up is Werewolf by Night. Oh, God. I don't even know with this guy anymore. I feel like he's a B tier card. The issue he has is he went from the 3-drop slot where he had no competition to the 4-drop slot where he sucks worse and has more competition. And it's just like, I don't even know what to do with this guy anymore. Like, he's playable and fine, but he's just not, like, if you're talking about cards like Marvel Rental, people complaining about cards getting nerfed immediately, Werewolf and Elsa are the poster boys. Like, this is, dropping this guy an energy it makes him so much worse, it's kind of unbelievable. And I think it's a consequence of how much they missed on previous cards that they missed on Werewolf because it sort of snowballs into that. He definitely deserved to get nerfed. Like, let's be real. We're not going to sit here and pretend that he didn't. But I just think that it's frustrating that they released a card that was not nerfable in a good way. There are a lot of cards that are nerfable in a good way. And one of the things I think that I like that they did with Blob when they made him a 6/0 and like gave him a number in his text is now you can really move that lever around. But with Werewolf, there's just like nothing. What do? Do you start him at like 3/0 and give him +2 or something? Isn't that still broken? Do you start him at like 3-3? Like I just don't know what the solution is. People have suggested a cap like Blob's, but I think that's different, right? Like if you put a cap on this card, it's like that sucks. Why would you even do that? It's like you're explicitly saying hit the cap or he sucks. And so I think Werewolf ends up in the B tier. I still play him. He's still a solid 4-drop, but he's not what he used to be, and I frankly think he could use a buff. Next up is X23, goes right next to Knull. Better for Destroy than Knull is. One of the other cards that is required for Destroy in order to be legitimately good. And the more I think about it, the more I am moving X23 and Knull down. Because between X23, Knull, and Nico, you kind of need all of them, right? This is the Tribunal thing that I was talking about, where it's like, you need all of these cards in order to make it happen. And if you don't have all of them, like I talked about how Knull gets you in the door, and I think that was probably wrong the more I think about it, right? Like, you need to have all of them. And that means it's Living Tribunal tier. And maybe even worse, because I think Living Tribunal is a better deck to have in your archetype. Next up is Zabu. Zabu is going straight into S tier. Zabu, there's not even a question of where he goes. It's just a question of where in S tier he goes. He is the man. This dude whips. He is so strong. So good. Played in Loki. Played in other Zabu decks. What are we talking about, right? Like, this guy is great. Zabu is near an apex, honestly, for how good he actually is. Like, legitimately great. Zabu is in the Black Knight deck. Zabu is in the Loki deck. Zabu is in various Annihilus decks, thanks to Sentry and Miss Marvel. And, like, look at all the cards surrounding him, right? Like, when you're playing Miss Marvel, you're playing Zabu. I am tempted to say that Zabu actually even goes up here. Like, I am tempted to say this, right? Like, Zabu, you get him in order to play the Black Knight deck. You get him in order to make your Iron Lad better. You get him in order to make your Miss Marvel better. You get him in order to make your Loki better. You get, like, there's just so much stuff here. He goes with like so many of the good cards, and so many of the good cards are good because they work with him. And Zabu is unbelievably good. You could honestly convince me of this if you wanted. Like, you could honestly convince me this is what it's at. Like, I don't think it's hard to convince me that Zabu is right behind Thanos. Like, you could legitimately talk me into that. Because, I mean, what? Am I going to play a Loki deck without Zabu right now? Probably not. I'm probably not doing that, am I? He's so damn good. Like, this is probably where I would have it, I think. So, that's what the final tier list looks like, if you ask me. This is what it looks like. I think this is roughly correct. Now, what I'm going to do is pass it to chat right now and ask chat to tell me if they think I got anything wrong. Where is Scar? Scar would be B tier, but you can't buy him with Series 4 and 5 things right now. He's only on the Battle Pass. But Scar would be B tier, below Caiera. So, any other questions y'all have? Quibbles with where I put stuff? Do predictions for the remaining cards? No, I am not in that business. Hitmonkey too high. I am comfortable with that. Kang could go lower, yes. Ghost Spider and Herc. I want Ghost Spider up, but I don't think I can afford it, right? You said Howard was the worst card in the game and put 2 below him. Apologize to the Duck. Okay, you know what? If we're going to be serious about the order here, Howard does go below anything else. And Kang probably ends up here. It probably looks more like this. Blob after nerf? Yes. Nico could be A. I disagree. I talked about that. If this is purchase prio based, I believe your list is correct. That is what this is. This is purchase prio based. Like that is what it is. Yes, Elsa is that bad. Correct. Nico should be better. Nico was better when she came out, but this meta is not a Nico deck. Black Knight is top of A tier, isn't he? Basically opens up a deck for you. I think I prefer the 2 cards above Black Knight right now, but yes, the fact that he opens up a deck for you does matter. It's just you also need some of the other stuff in order to make that happen. Selene might be a little high. I will admit to being optimistic on Selene and Galactus. I was definitely being optimistic there for sure. I was very optimistic on Selene and Galactus, I think. Hates me to say it, but Werewolf feels high. That's plausible to me. Looking at this myself, I'm thinking that Annihilus feels high. I'm thinking that Annihilus feels high to me. Just looking at it for myself, I'm thinking that Annihilus feels like he should be here instead. That's something that sticks out to me. I feel like it's a little awk for Annihilus right now. Is Mobius really better than Caiera? Yes, but if you're just gonna play Thanos Lockjaw, pick up Caiera. Right? Like, yes, but there's context. Is Elsa even bad? She sucks! Ham better than Monkey. Yeah, I mean, I think if we're going to do it like this, what we can do is put Tribunal up here, and then put Ham up here and move Monkey to be like somewhere in this range. I think makes a little more sense to me. Blob is still a good card. Yes. Legion is probably too high for most of the player base. I agree. And I talked about that when I talked about him. I'm hoping people watch the video and don't just watch the tier list. But yeah. If energy cheat is important as you say with Zabu, why is Ravonna so low? Because Ravonna is the worst of these energy cheating cards. She only goes in Mr. Negative. She only goes in Living Tribunal. Zabu is much more widely applicable. You need Zabu for those decks too, half the time. And he also goes in like every other deck. Mirage should be lower. You need Loki. I think this is a fair place for Mirage to be. Because yes, you need Loki, but getting the ability to play the best deck in the game correctly, or the best list for the best deck in the game, that matters. Like, marginal advantages when you're playing the best deck in the game, very important. They push you to be a better deck. Iron Lad could be higher for a different meta. Yes, that's correct. That is correct. Snowguard seems a little high to me for the Loki argument too. You know what? I think that's fair. I think we can put Snowguard like here, and I'd be happy with that. I think if we put Snowguard there, I think that's fair. Where's Stegron in 2099? In Series 3 now, fucker! Darkhawk is worse than Galactus and Tribunal. As a deck, yes, but those other cards require so much more of you. Gladiator C, Yondu A. Okay. Ghost Spider much lower C. I'm interested in Ghost Spider decks right now. I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt. I think Black Knight should be higher than Lad. This is about purchase priority. You're going to use Lad more. Black Knight is a very limited card. And at any point in time, it could just get like completely obliterated by them removing a bit of text on him. Ghost Spider, Herc are good right now, but Herc is Def C. The way I thought about it was there's a big delta between where Ghost Spider is in C and where Hercules is in C. So that was sort of my thought process at the very least. You know, that was how I thought about it. Are there any further major? Are there Gladiator A? Explain, please. He's a 3/8 and is awesome. What are we doing here? I mean, like, you could say he should be lower in A. Like, you could put him here. I think that's fine. But like, he's a 3/8. What are we talking about? That's a 3/8. He's awesome. This guy rules. He's worse than a meta full of big boys. This is the worst Gladiator meta ever. I'm still playing him. What do you want me to say? Like, Gladiator is here. Honestly, he is. That's where he's supposed to be. Like, he's so strong right now. He is so strong right now. What'd you rank Gladiator's animation? Mid. So it's personal bias? What are you talking about? Do you think... Okay. Yes. What? Yeah, of course it's personal bias. This is my personal tier list. What the fuck do you think I'm rating this on? What are you talking about? What? Holy shit, you put opinion in your opinion column? Oh my god, that's crazy. Jesus.